Hey, House Arrest listeners. My name is Abby. I'm joined by my friends Spoon and Lee, and we are Voices of the Highlands. Thank you so much to Balenciaga for reaching out to us to join this talk. Voices of the Highlands is a digital storytelling platform highlighting Montagnard Indigenous identity and experiences. And we are going to kick off the night with a couple of introductions. I can go ahead and start. So my name is Abby. I am originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, born and raised. I am a recent graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a degree in education, and I currently work at nonprofit in Philadelphia. I will pass it on to Lee for an introduction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lee. I'm living in Vietnam right now. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for tuning in. I graduated from UNC 2019, so it's been a while, but that's where we all reconvened, I guess, but we've known each other for a long time. So I majored in AAAD, African American and Diaspora Studies, and then I minored in Asian Studies. So I'm just here in Vietnam now on a farm, and we'll talk more about that. I'm going to pass it on to Foon.
Thanks, Lee. Hi, everyone. My name is Spoon. I am also a recent grad from UNC Chapel Hill. I graduated May 2020 with majors in public policy and Asian studies. And I'm also a co-founder of Voice of the Highlands along with my friends Abby and Lee. Very great to be here with you all.
Awesome. Yeah, we are so grateful to be here. And my understanding of House Arrest is that the motivation is to connect folks from all over the world of Asian descent with the themes of identity and bridging gaps and sharing cultural appreciation. And that's definitely at the heart of what we do at Voices of the Highlands. And I want to start our conversation off by talking about identity. So like I shared, we all were raised in North Carolina. We all identify as Montagnard, and I would love to hear from Lee and Foon, and I can also share about what those identities mean to you, what it means to be a Montagnard Indigenous person, and what does it mean to have grown up in North Carolina.
So I can take this question first. Thank you, Abby, for posing the question. I will start off by saying, as Montagnard people, there are many different ethnic groups, or you can say tribes. I identify as Gahal. So we're mainly in the south of Vietnam. Right now I'm in Jiling or Ndring. I don't know if y'all would know what that is, but I'm in a village with my husband. So, just been connecting with my identity and learning my language, relearning and just strengthening it. And I, obviously in America, growing up in North Carolina, you have to, adjust, assimilate a little bit for school, all of that. So you lose a bit of Gahal. I mean, I guess my parents just didn't really notice how much they neglected, pushing Cajal every day. It was like they started to mix English and Cajal because we just spoke English more at school. We are at school a lot when we are young. But I would say the most time that I spent with Montagnard people was like probably at church, maybe like once a week. And that's also where I met Abby, my friend. We're very close. And then Food I met later on through church as well. But that was like in 6th grade. But I mean, we're still here today, still connected. I love it. And then I just love how we reconnected in college. And it's just very wonderful to have them because I was really homesick and feeling bad my first year. I was like, where are my people at, right? That's the PWI. If you don't know, it's PWI, and it's just like very odd, that transition for me from where I was in North Carolina and who I was used to being around. But I would say, a lot of us are in North Carolina, and I can tell a lot of young people are really being empowered. I can see it, like they just proud of who they are and they want to know more. And we also are aware that there's a lot of stuff missing in the history books written by us, and we're just like, well, we got to start somewhere. So we're just happy to have each other, and we're hoping to rediscover our past and just reconnect and rebuild. So I'll pass it on to Foon.
Thank you, Lee. Like I introduced earlier, my name is Foon, and I identify as Benong Montagnard Indigenous. So both of my parents are Benong and married in a village in Dak Nong called Dak Mill, and I was also born in Dak Mill. I don't remember much of life there. My family came to the US in 2002. We lived in a refugee camp in Cambodia for 6 months before we were resettled into Greensboro, North Carolina. And for folks who may not know, North Carolina actually has the largest population of Hmong communities outside of Southeast Asia. So there is a very strong hold of, there's an incredible community of Montagnard folks here in North Carolina and predominantly in our major cities, which are Charlotte, Raleigh, and Greensboro. So I feel very fortunate to have grown up in Greensboro around a lot of other Benong community members. We lived in an apartment complex. That was where we were resettled. And most of my neighbors were from my village, were friends of my parents. In the beginning, my parents wouldn't even let us look out the window because they were so scared. Rightfully so. They were in a new country with new norms, new systems, a new language, really kind of unsure of like who they could trust, considering the journey that they had been on, leaving Vietnam because of the religious persecution and the land rights abuses that were happening, not just in my village in Dak Mill, but all over Vietnam and other Montagnard communities as well. But for me, I felt very kind of separate from that mistrust as a child. I was always kind of running around with the other children, and I think the other children in the community at the apartment complex felt the same way. We were kind of like curious about a lot of things, you know. We just wanted to go and find the blackberry patches or go play on the swings at the playground. And I had a really happy childhood. I was in classes with all of my friends because we all had to be in ESL classes. English as the second language classes is what they were known as. And so I didn't really feel that much different. I think I kind of started to feel a little more, but even then, not so much when I moved schools. And I think from a very young age, I was always kind of conscious that I was Benong. I remember when we had to do a bulletin board all about ourselves, and I brought in my yellow woven Benong satchel that my mom gave me, and I like proudly plastered it onto the bulletin board, and was very happy to tell people that like my family is from Vietnam and that we were Montagnard, not Vietnamese. I was kind of like, I kind of had it rehearsed in my head, like I'm from Vietnam, but I'm not Vietnamese. But I didn't really know what it meant to be Montagnard. And I kind of rejected, I began to reject the idea of being Montagnard a little as I aged, like through middle school and high school in the US, which are when you're in your teens and you just kind of want to fit in. And I thought that my identity kind of othered me. So there was this kind of like conflict I had. And I think I kind of started to reckon with it a little more when my sister started doing service learning back at the apartment complex where we were resettled. And there was a new wave of refugee immigrant children there. Now they were from Nepal, Burma, Afghanistan. And so I kind of like began to see myself once more as like that child who was so unafraid and very unapologetic about her identity. And now through college and in the work that I do with Lee and Abby through Voice of the Highlands, I think that what we try to do is really curate like a space for people to come as they are, wherever they are in that spectrum of like identity, whether they fully identify as like Montagnard, Indigenous, or whether they're just like kind of claiming like being Asian American, because it can be very hard with all of like the different forces at play to accept your identity. And we really try to create that space and be here. And I credit a lot of my journey to being part of Voice of the Highlands from like my family's journey here and going through school and all of that. And I'll pass it over to Abby.
Yeah, thank you all both so much for sharing those. I definitely relate to the sentiments that you've shared about maybe being proud of your identity initially and then going through a phase of uncertainty or even insecurity, and then coming back around and reclaiming that identity. Born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. My mother is Shirai and my father is Renee. and they both immigrated from Vietnam. They both were resettled into resettlement camps. My mom in the Philippines with my grandparents, and my father in Thailand. They spent a couple months there before meeting in North Carolina. So their love was, their relationship was made in the USA, like the Demi Lovato song. And yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to the idea of having a little bit of resentment against their own hometown or where they grew up. And like Greensboro, like a lot of people were like, Green's boring. And I felt like I didn't have a lot to do and I didn't appreciate it for what it was. And like Foon said, like the there's a really strong and tight-knit community of Montagnards in Greensboro and other parts of North Carolina. And I definitely started to miss that in college. And I also miss that now that I live somewhere else outside of North Carolina. But yeah, I mean, growing up was like going to church every Sunday, and that was really my only access to language and access to culture and community. And outside of that, I went to school. I also was an English language learner student. I also was surrounded by a lot of, if not Montagnards, then other Southeast Asian and other students of color. And that was the, I guess, the small community that I was always surrounded by. And I, similarly to Foon, was had memorized like the script of like, oh, I'm from Vietnam, or my family's from Vietnam, but we're Montagnard, but not really even knowing for me like what that meant. And because obviously as a child, I don't even most I want to say that most children don't really know what an ethnic group is, or like know this maybe the distinction between ethnic groups. So that was something that I knew, but something that I also struggled with, even though I didn't realize it at the time. And of course, then middle school hit, and I definitely had a self-hating phase, definitely rejected my identity, rejected being Asian, being Asian American, and wanting to just, subscribe to the ideals and the norms that the US so lovingly has to offer. um, and then started to learn more in high school and started to become more generally aware about kind of racial politics and identity as a whole, and then realizing that I did fit somewhere in that, and that I did have a right and um, I had every right to be proud of who I was and to learn about where my family comes from and what our history is. And so I started to learn more in high school. And then, of course, in college, I also minored in Asian studies. So I was learning about a whole swath of things. And of course, like reconnected with Foon and Lee. And we just so happened to be in the same class together. Actually, was it? I don't even know if it was a coincidence. I don't remember. I don't remember if we had planned to take the same class, because we all either minored or majored in Asian studies. And through one of Foon's friends, learned about this grant called the Vimy Global Team Award. And yeah, we're interested in applying for it, and ultimately did. We all had this idea of wanting to do something for our communities and wanting to kind of give back, but also promote cultural preservation. Um, and then, yeah, Voice of the Highlands was kind of almost born on a whim in the year of 2018. We were able to do research abroad in the summer of 2018, and it's really evolved ever since. So I'll pass it on to Lee and Foon, who we all have like varying reasons for wanting to do this project, and that all those reasons kind of intersected, and it became what it is today. But I think we all have a different story to share as far as why Voices of the Highlands.
Sharing, Abby and Foon. So yeah, Voices of the Highlands, actually, that name, we were like rushing to submit our application. So we were like, the name was like one of the last things we did. And so Abby and Foon came up with different names, and I was like, we gotta combine it, right? So we're out of time. But that was just funny, and the name just works. And we also call ourselves BOF for short. Yeah, I think well, I know this project is a special project for each of us and for our supporters because we are doing it ourselves. We're doing it now. We're young. We're doing it now. It's for us. It's by us. And we're just really bold about being Asian, but also Indigenous, because you often don't hear about many other Southeast Asians other than Vietnamese people or Filipino people, right? It's just, there are so many more people, so many other ethnic groups, so many more brown people too, you know what I mean? And it's just, we want to just be in charge of our stories. Like, you're going to know about us and we're going to tell you. And it's also a great opportunity for us to show who we are after the war, through the war, and beyond the war, right? Because oftentimes you only hear about us as refugees, war heroes, I don't know, people being jailed, like my grandfather, because they participated in the war and then having to relocate to America. But yeah, that's a big story or a big part of our story. The war is a big part of our story. Um, that we can't just be stuck there. Time has moved on and we have continued to create and we survived. And we have families, we have friends, we're doing things like Voth. Um, and at the same time, we know there are a lot of like old resources from, typically white anthropologists or non-Montagnard military people that kept surveys of us, I guess. French people, yeah, I would say French. There was a heavy French presence, so definitely French and American resources on us that don't really go into detail about us, except for like, this is what they do, and maybe they'll say something degrading about us, right? So they'll go into detail, but maybe in a distorted way, because they don't know us, they don't know our languages. Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for us to just have a healing space and a growing space. Old people are welcome too. Like, we want everybody here and we appreciate all the support. We'll continue to do this forever, I guess. And then we're hoping to pass on the torch to, future leaders. And I'm happy to pass it on to Foon.
Yeah, I just really want to uplift the point that Lee stated about like how much of the story of Hmong people has been taken from our own hands and made and manipulated and used by other folks, predominantly American imperial forces, U.S. forces, French folks, and very rarely like actually allow the opportunity to share the stories that we wanted to be shared. And so Voice of the Highlands really was driven by mission initially. And like Lee said, like we came up with the name at the very end, very last minute. And it kind of came together because what we wanted from this project was to both capture the stories and experiences of our people, ourselves, while also making sure that we were able to write the narratives that we wanted to, and had a choice on whether we wanted to center the Vietnam War, whether we wanted to center some of the traumatic experiences that we usually are centered around, and also to just share stories from the diaspora, because it was very recently that I've learned that there were Benong people in Sweden. These stories we don't know about, and these experiences. What I was really interested in was like kind of the spirit of Montagnard folks and how resilient we are and how adaptable we are. And oftentimes this resilience, comes at the cost of, is forced because of survival. Like there's no other option but to be resilient. And so that was like one big factor, but on a very personal experience, on a very personal level, my youngest brother was like probably my biggest motivating factor. I think it was the summer before the school year, before we thought about pursuing the grant where I was at home in Greensboro with my family, working in Greensboro for the summer, and I was kind of also babysitting my younger brother. And we were just having a conversation, and I think at one point in the night, like I had just thought about like the stories my mom probably heard from her parents, the kind of folklores, the kind of like tall tales she heard when she was growing up in Banong. And I also recounted like bits and pieces where she told me those same stories. And I thought about Daniel, my youngest brother, kind of not having those stories and also not really being interested in those stories. And we did have a storybook that Lee and Abby worked on. But I was really craving like a Banong story as well. Like I also wanted to make sure that, you know, my Banong community was represented in that, and like I wanted to help with that because I really wanted my younger brother to feel seen and feel valued, and feel like the main character of the story. Oftentimes, maybe for me, I took for granted that like when you see yourself in history, you do feel empowered almost, like you feel a sense of importance. And when you don't see yourself in stories, you potentially lack that, or it's harder for you to feel like your story is valuable when, you know, main characters don't look like you and they don't reflect back at you and their families don't look like you. And yeah, when you just can't really relate to that experience, there is, you know, that a very famous line, which is like, no history, no self, no history, no self, which is like a play on words. Like if you know your history, if you understand, if you're able to recount those important moments, those traditions, those cultures, then you do sometimes most likely come out with a better understanding of who you are because you have a base of like, you know, what your ancestors were like, what the people before you were like. And if you don't have that, it's very easy to feel lost, and kind of latch on to other things because you don't really have anything else to hold on to hold you to an identity. And so that was important to me too because I wanted him to feel as connected to his Banong roots as my parents are. And I wanted him to feel like his story, his family story, and his story were as valuable as the stories we hear about in history classes that oftentimes centered, you know, white colonist, and wanted him to feel seen and important as well, and to own, you know, whatever story that he wanted. And selfishly, I wanted to go to Vietnam as well and just see my family and be able to talk to elders and travel, and kind of also visit Lee and Abby's family as well, because in Vietnam, most folks don't identify with Montagnard. They more so identify with their individual tribal identity. And so if it wasn't for Lee and Abby, I think it would have been a very difficult experience trying to go to like a Ha village, Jediah Day village. And so I was also just very curious about the similarities between how our families were. And so Voice of the Highlands just seemed like a very natural project for me. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, and yeah, Voice of the Highlands has just evolved so much since 2018. And that summer, Lee Foon and I traveled across the Central Highlands and we visited town after village after city, documenting oral history, documenting photos and film, and trying to connect with local artists and artisans and craftspeople and musicians. And a lot of what we were finding is that yeah, our culture, our history is very much at risk of endangerment or even extinction, and that's really terrifying. And I think a lot of Indigenous folks and communities can relate to the fear that they, you know, are that their culture, their history is on its last thread. And we, at least, yeah, for me, like again, circling back to my upbringing and my childhood, where I was learning about, you know, what even is a Montagnard. In high school, I did a project like Foon had done at her school, and maybe a lot of other kids had to do in their schools as well. And I did a trifold board and was looking at historical facts and representations of culture, and I was finding that there were just so many. Well, first of all, there were not that many resources, and the ones that did exist were all over the place. Like they were on Wikipedia, they were on this website that didn't look like super reliable. They were on this other website. There was no one cohesive, consolidated place where I could trust that this information, like Lee said, was coming from a Montagnard person or Montagnard source. A lot of the text that exists is very either outdated or written from a war military lens. Um, and that's, yeah, very, very troubling, because I'm sure a lot of Montagnards have had to undergo this similar battle of wanting to learn but not having the resources to. And so for me, Voices of the Highlands serves to be that resource. And it also, again, ever since 2018, has evolved to become a lot more. And I think the word platform just really summarizes what we do, because I like to think of a platform as like a jumping off point. And I hope that like when Montagnards and other folks see our page and they scroll through and they give us a DM or whatever, that it becomes a jumping off point to connect with their family, ask their parents or their grandparents questions, get stories from them, to tell their own story. One of the initiatives that we have is for folks to just submit their own stories or their own anecdotes, or to answer the question, what does being Montagnard mean to you? Because everyone is going to have a different answer, and it is really important to preserve those stories and to highlight them and say this is something that is worth telling and worth sharing, and our identity is very, very valuable. So that's um, yeah, all of that is to say that I wish that Voices of the Highlands existed when I was younger, and I'm glad to have put in the work that we put in at this point. And I only hope that it continues to grow, and more folks get involved, because again, there's just so much that we could to share. Um, Kind of, yeah, a segue into that is talking about community, and what that means for us. Again, just because What's the Highlands started with kind of the community in mind, and how can we serve our community, and also what does the community have that what artistic talent or what history or what stories do they have that can be highlighted and shared on a digital platform, which is a little more accessible than the traditional way of sharing stories verbally. Um, and now we've formed our own community of folks from all over North Carolina, and we've been able to meet people from other parts of the US and even the world at this point through our platform. So I, yeah, want to pose the question to y'all of, what does community mean for you, and what's a hope that you have for the Montagnard Indigenous community?
I can take the question. Thanks, Abby and Foon, for everything. I would say, well, we all know community is like a big group of people, right? It can be a small group, but we're a big group of people that stand together and support one another. So, in order to be able to do that, we have to be very secure in ourselves. We have to be very adamant about our identity and saying, we're Montagnard, everybody, we're Montagnard, we're not Gingit, right? That's typically, well, that's the official name, I guess, of the ethnic group for Vietnamese people. Um, and within our community, we call them Yuan. We call them Yuan. So if you ever hear us say that, that's what we're talking about, Gingit people. Um, but yeah, to be a community, we always want to make sure we have our support system strong, right? We want to make sure our elders are good, our young kids are good, we're good. So I'm just hoping we can, I don't know, there's a lot of generational differences for sure, and like political differences between the different generations. But I just hope that we can work through those things, improve upon those things, not ignore them, while also building each other up. Because that's the only way, nobody wants to go down. Everybody just wants to keep going and stay strong, right? I mean, we have our low points, but the good thing is if you have a good support system, you'll be good. You'll be okay. And I hope like we can reconnect with our traditions, our cultures. I know like being separated from the land, the homeland can be quite difficult because you're in other countries where you have to assimilate and all that stuff. And having land is different in other countries. It's not like you own the land. It's not your family's land, for the most part. Um, so I hope we can reconnect with things like music for sure. I remember in 2018 just going through each of our villages. It's kind of hard to find like solid performances for the most part where they knew what they were doing. My aunt, just bless her heart, she tried. She tried. She was trying to dance, but I was like, I don't know if she knows what she's doing. Some people try to sing some songs, but I mean, there are some few, few, a couple songs that people really know. And then as far as talking about religious practices, there are definitely songs that go with ceremonies. But the problem with that is a lot of people are Christians, either Protestant or Catholic, and they don't feel like it's safe or very holy to just recite and just even recite or talk about these religious practices. So, we respect that, but, I'm still looking for it. You know what I mean? There are people that will tell you, but I feel like you have to get them by themselves because oftentimes in interviews, everybody's looking like their grandma, their mom, their wife, their husband, whatever, the kids, they're all staring at you. So it's just like the person we're interviewing may feel pressured not to say certain things. Right. But I'm hoping we can become more open, and just realize like you don't have to believe in it anymore. You can still talk about it so that we have resources on what we used to do. I mean, for me personally, I don't mind reconnecting with with the past religion. Um, I don't mind because I personally don't identify as a Christian. Um, everybody has their right to just do what they want to do, right? And I'm hoping we can definitely reconnect with each other so that our music can become stronger. Like I want us to be able to have music in our language because if you notice, young people love music, right? And I think it'll really help us build our language abilities, language skills, so that we're not just there staring at each other, unsure of how to interview our elders. You know, I would just love it just to build our culture and then just adapt to these times and just have a stronger music. What am I saying? Stronger culture around music and the arts. We have lots of artists and lots of like visual artists as well, and storytellers, writers like Abby. She got a book, y'all. She's got a book. So it's called, she'll talk about it. I don't know. Yeah, that's her thing. That's her thing. So yeah, I just hope we can just build upon our arts because when you're able to create and express freely, it's like there's no stopping you. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Food.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So for me, I mean, I think community is so intertwined with kind of sometimes in the space we talk about like the village mentality that a lot of us grew up in. And sometimes, the village mentality can look like ladies gossiping in the church, but it is to me like this sense of care that a lot of us have. And even if I don't identify as Kahal, Jiraya Day, all of these other groups, it's the experience of being Montagnard, the experience of that connection to the homeland in whatever way that you are, that you feel connected to the Central Highlands. Is what kind of builds community. As I stated earlier, like a lot of people in Vietnam don't really identify with the word Montagnard. It is a French colonial term, and it does like encompass all of the tribes from the Central Highlands. And I'd like to think that the community in the diaspora has reclaimed it as a term of solidarity, as like an identity that connects all of us into like this understanding of a certain kind of struggle, a certain kind of experience. And you might have some generational separation, but that experience still exists within you, within your lineage, within your ancestry. And so I don't have to take away from someone who does identify as Montiard Indigenous. I feel like that is a very valid, extremely important identity to feel empowered in. And I think part of why Voice of the Highlands is so important is that I hope that it helps people feel empowered in their identity. Because I think that when you feel a sense of purpose in who you are and um, a sense of uniqueness in who you are, you begin to like really feel this like magic within who you are and like why you exist. I don't think it's like a coincidence that you know we are here in the US, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we are still here. We are here through the the past of genocide and religious persecution, all of these and trials and violence that our families and trauma that our families have gone through, and yet we still stand. And I think that is what gives me hope, is that so I do feel like a lot of people, a lot of youth are feeling extremely empowered in this identity, extremely safe in this identity of identifying as Montagnard. Um, and if anyone who is Montagnard among the diaspora hears this, I hope that that like just you existing is a testament to the legacy of your ancestors, to the strength within you, and that's something that you can't give up because it just exists within you. And I'm so proud to be a part of Voice of the Highlands along with Abby and Lee, and I'm just like constantly inspired by their activism and their engagement, just how much this project means to us. And I hope that this is just the start of something. I think Lee and Abby and I have founded something very special, but this is just the beginning of a youth-led movement, I hope, or something that is in the hands of the youth. And I think that our hearts will carry us there. I feel like our energy and how much we give will carry us there. That's my hope. And I'll pass it over to Abby for, I believe, the final remarks of the evening.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. From both of y'all, just sharing, yeah, just the sheer amount of, unfortunately, trauma that our families and our ancestors have gone through. It is important to note that Montagnards have obviously lived for many, many years and have gone through colonialism and imperial forces from multiple groups that have already been mentioned, and are continuing to face issues today all over the world, including in our own hometowns in North Carolina. And yeah, I would absolutely, I hope for my community is to live in recognition of this trauma, but not to live through trauma. I definitely witness a lot of, or definitely have heard and witnessed my own members of my community going through just so much, and even in again Greensboro, North Carolina. Um, and I would very much love to take control and ownership of who we are, and to be able to tell our stories in a way that is, again, just not informed by the trauma that we've experienced, while again still recognizing it. And as Lee mentioned, I had the really just the privilege and opportunity to write a children's book, and it's called Yat's Backyard Jungle, and it was written through the organization Room to Read. And it's a story about a young Montagnard girl who loses touch with her grandma for a little bit, and then they kind of reconnect and share a love of food and gardening. And there is definitely a mention of memory of Vietnam, of storytelling, but ultimately it's a universal story about family and love and connection. And that's kind of an idea of what I want to see, are just more stories, more works of art, more spaces dedicated to us, more, yeah, just time and energy dedicated to us, and our other Montagnard indigenous folks taking ownership and creating things with their name on it, with their identity tacked onto it. That it can be about anything. You know, I want to see like I want to see like a Kim's Convenience, but about with the Montnier family. I want to see like a Never Have I Ever with the Montnier teenage girl with angst. Like I want to see these very just typical stories, but why not make it a Montnier protagonist? So with that said, I want to thank y'all for listening to our talk tonight. Does Dilly and Foon, do y'all have any final thoughts or concluding remarks before I sign us off?
Don't forget to follow us on our Instagram and Facebooks. We go by the same name, Voices of the Highlands. And then our personal socials, we don't mind posting them on the YouTube video. But if you want to follow me, or what is it? Subscribe to me on my YouTube. I go by Lika, Ly space Ka, and you can follow my adventures in Vietnam as I'm learning. But I am happy to connect with y'all. And thank you for tuning in. Foon and Abby, if y'all have anything else, y'all can share.
There we go. Thank you so much for tuning in and for giving us a space. I think that this is what, we should continue to is give space to Indigenous folks and folks from marginalized backgrounds to share that they want to share. Something we've been talking about this whole evening is like just allowing people to share the stories that they want to share, and to folks who have been abused by, who have previously been so just thank you and Abby for such wonderful teammates, and yeah, definitely follow us on social media. My internet is unstable. Okay.
I think Foon's internet is unstable, but that's okay. Yeah, our page on Instagram and on Facebook are chock full of resources. If you want to support us and get to know us, connect with us personally, we would be happy to do so. But once again, thank you to those who are listening, and thank you to Balenciaga for inviting us to join. And with that, I'll see y'all next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.